Let's learn about GET requests in Python. Now, what is a GET request? GET requests are basically requests to a server that retrieve information stored on the server. A server has to be set up with an API that allows these calls. The example API we're going to be using today is called openweathermap.org. It's linked in the description. Go ahead, sign up. It's free to use for standard users. You know, if you're not going to be making more than 1,000 requests a day, it's free. And most of you are not going to be pushing that kind of volume. So go ahead and sign up. Go ahead and sign up so that you can follow along in this tutorial. We're going to be using the current weather data API doc, and inside there's a geocoder API linked that we're going to be using as well to get the latitude and longitude of a city, which we'll go into that in just a minute. But anytime you are making HTTP requests and working with an API, it is invaluable to have the docs at hand, because not all APIs work the same. The majority of them return similar file formats and stuff like that, but the way that they're formatted will be different. The way you access data will be different, and it's nearly impossible to figure out an API without the documentation. And the GitHub is also in the description. But once you're signed up, you will receive an email that says confirm your account, confirm, and you will receive an API key. Now, back in our code, I've shown you guys how to set up a .env file for your API keys, so there's no need to go through that again. But get that set up, or just store it in a variable if this is a local project. So let's jump into actually making our first GET request, right? So we're going to look at the current weather data documentation and see this API call. On this, our GET request, we're going to require the latitude and longitude of a location. And not everybody knows, you know, the latitude and longitude of their city off the top of their head. So they've provided this geocoder API. So we click that link, and this is something we can work with initially. A lot of times when working with an API, you're going to have to make multiple calls to get the data you want. In this instance, we already have to make 2 calls, one to the geocoder and one to the current weather data API. So we're going to copy this URL and set our response to requests.get with our URL. And now you see there are these little variable things in here. We're going to set this to our API key and make this a formatted string. Now, brief explanation of what's going on here in the URL. We have our URL for the API, right? And geo, I assume, is telling it to use the geocoder, version number, and then we have our parameters. Now, these parameters vary from API to API. The documentation does a great job explaining them. They are always preceded by a question mark that in a URL says, okay, coming up next, parameters. So what you'll want to do is either plug in the data manually. I like to put in variables. I'm going to just get these from the GitHub because I don't really want to type them out again. We're going to be looking at the data for Dallas, Texas in the US, limit 5. So now we have our response. So first off, we want to check if the response actually got a success code, which is 200. Now a fail code is 404. We don't really have to worry about that. I'm not too concerned with error handling. You can do your own research and find how to handle these kind of errors, but I'm 100% confident that this is going to receive a response. So we're going to say data equals response JSON. Now this is not part of the JSON package. This is actually part of the request package, and it says get the response in JSON format. Now I'm going to add an else just in case data needs to be an empty list. At this point, we can print any data from the request response. Now, on geocoding API, we can look at the format of the response. This is in JSON. If you don't know how to read JSON, it's pretty simple. It's basically like Python formatting. You have square brackets indicating a list, curly brackets indicating a dictionary. So as you can see, this is a list of dictionaries with different locations. Now, we are assuming that our code is going to receive a list of one location with Dallas, Texas. There may be more, but the first one is going to be most relevant. So inside of our data, we're going to get the first index and say get lat, because as you can see in the documentation, we have lat and long. That's what we're after. So we're going to print that and just make sure that it's getting data. And it is. It's got the latitude of Dallas, Texas. So now we're going to take away this print statement and say latitude equals data 0. And we're going to copy this and say longitude and long, because I believe that's what it was in the API right there. See, yep. And we could get anything else, but all we really need is latitude and longitude so that we can make our next API call to the current weather data. Now, I'm actually going to leave this as a challenge for you. What I want you to do, make a GET request to this URL and get the main, actually, no, not the main, print the description of the weather, right? So this weather value description, it's not going to be the same as what we got here. Well, it is, it's just not formatted the same. So the way you access it will be different. Remember, this is dictionary and this indicates a list. See if you can do it on your own. Go ahead, pause the video. And if you can't figure it out, that's all right. Just come back and we'll walk through it together. All right. Hopefully that went well and you figured it out. If not, come along and we'll do it together. So we're going to call this weather response so we don't mix up our variables, and call this requests. Copy from here and copy this. Now we're going to make this a formatted string, take our variable and replace it right here. Take our variables here and boom, there we go. Now in the weather response, as I showed you before, it is a dictionary, right? So we're not going to be accessing a list index until we get to weather, which the value is a list. So that's where we'll access the index. That doesn't make much sense. Hopefully you figured that out. If not, here's how you do it. We're going to say if, actually, no, we're not. We're going to copy paste this code and replace response with weather response, because I don't like retyping things that are unnecessary to retype. So now that our data consists of this, we're going to say weather data equals weather response get weather. And now we have our little list of weather data. And we can print weather data, the first index, and say get description. Now we should get the description in our response. Response attribute has no attribute get in the weather. I have made a critical error. It is a typo actually. So we're going to make this data and then it should work. There we go. My problem was I was actually trying to use get on the weather response, which has no function get. So now that we know how to access this, we can get any data we need from the server. And that concludes this short tutorial on how to use Python requests for GET requests. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment with any errors you find, or if you just found the video helpful, be sure to leave a comment. And I've been tossing around the idea with my audience about a Discord server to discuss errors and concepts for future videos. If this is something you're interested in, or just would like a place to talk about coding and debug errors with other fellow programmers, let me know in the comments and we will try to make it happen. I will be releasing a video on Python requests for HTTP post requests, so be sure to have bell notifications on if you want to see that. But until then, keep on coding.